20 to 25% improvements, and nowhere near any of the data that we simulated into the model. And here you can see the impact, again, a very large impact on the track. And I'll skip this because I'm running out of time, but I can show you this later. It's very similar to the other forecasts that we get these far field impacts, and it changes the forecast. And to show that it actually happens in the West Pacific, here's Typhoon Sinlaku. We got an average of 5 to 25% track improvement. We got these very large improvements early on while we were flying, while the different programs out in the West Pacific were flying. But then when they stopped flying for about a day and they started to get the improvements were much smaller. And it's interesting that we were getting these very large improvements early on and then smaller improvements later on. Typhoon Hagupit, again, this was a storm that was sampled later on in its lifetime as it was undergoing ET. We had some very large improvements early on, very erratic improvements and degradations. So whether we actually sampled it, we're not getting the largest improvements here. We're getting the largest improvements when we flew around Sinlaku. And this is an interesting case in that Sinlaku was well north of the subtropical ridge, and we got some impacts up there, but very small impacts here. But it actually grew in time. This was the 20th. This was actually the first one, a very small impact when it wasn't sampled. And then this change, even though we didn't sample during this period, we got this larger cyclonic circulation and then a much stronger cyclonic circulation around the storm. And that's what kept the storm in the models and improved the actual intensity forecast as well. And then finally, Zhangmi, I'll finish off with that. Again, some erratic improvements, but we did sample during the entire lifetime of the storm, mostly degradations, as you can see. In the Atlantic, again, another case where we had 15 to 30% improvements. We didn't fly anywhere near the tropical cyclone. So this is the first time we're actually looking globally at the impacts of these data and all the tropical cyclones around the globe. Some interesting results in the Atlantic. The impacts behave as we've seen in previous results where they decrease after 72 hours. But in the West Pacific, they increase after 72 hours. That's an interesting result. I'm not sure why that happened. These specific impacts are comparable to the other basins, even though we didn't sample anywhere near any of these specific storms. There's large case-by-case variations in the impacts. And again, it's hard to separate what is causing these impacts. But the only reason could be just the drop wind-sound data or the fact that I ran on different computers. So with that, I'll end and take any questions.
Hello. Any questions? Yes, please.
So you look at the improvement in the individual storm, and you, as I said, look at, I think it's probably more important than said, look at some typical NWP skill score, like quantum bar, high, harmonic combination, Lumen square, and something like that.
Yeah, these, I haven't looked at those results. We actually have a paper coming out led by UCMWF where they look at that result in a number of models, and it improves. There's a small global improvement to a lot of these fields, but these I'm just looking at the tracks because that's why we're actually dropping this out.
Yeah, but you already done the work. You have GFS forecast already done, and it's pretty easy for us to do the analysis.
Yeah, like I said, there's a paper that's coming out where we do show that there are improvements.
You just say it's ECMWF, not GFS.
Well, no, ECMWF led the project, but they're yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah was a very strange case. Track turned southward toward Haiti, and you say there was no sampling of Hannah?
Not until after it started moving north away from Haiti. At that point, there was no sampling.
I think Yi-Jin from NRL is looking at that case, and I thought the G4 flew out east of Jacksonville, not in the storm, but
During that period, Gustav was getting ready to make landfall. They were flying only around Gustav. They weren't flying from
this was about the time Gustav was already inland.
Yes, after the case that I showed,
Okay.
they flew 2 missions in Hannah, but that was a few days after that case.
Very tough case.
Yeah. Here's, there were 2 missions in Hannah late in its lifetime, and those forecasts were improved. But the case that I showed was way back here, a few days before.
Yeah, in the conclusion, you mentioned that the Western Pacific, there is impact after 72 hours.
Well, there's
maybe
impact
I missed
before,
it.
but it increases after 72 hours in the GFS.
Yeah, do you show some typical case? Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, the West Pacific is in green here. Most of the basins, it decreases, and it increases here. This is just for 2008, but when we look at other years and average those in, it actually increases in time, and in the Atlantic it decreases in time. And actually, Atlantic is blue, and we get a negative. We get a degradation in 5 days.
Very interesting. Thank you.